Good evening. Tonight, we begin with something as extraordinary and unprecedented as it is dangerous for Russia's military stability and overall international security. Russia, in its attempt to demonstrate its strength and technological superiority, recently conducted a secret military test involving an advanced aerial strike strategy. However, the test has gone catastrophically wrong, resulting in the total destruction of an entire squadron of Russia's most advanced fighter jets, sending shockwaves through Moscow. Putin's military might has been dealt a blow of such magnitude that the ramifications are yet to be fully realized. Putin now has 48 critical hours to respond, and his decision could determine the future trajectory of Russia's military and international standing. Russian officials are scrambling to assess the situation and control the damage, while international powers are watching closely, anticipating Russia's next move. If the consequences of this catastrophic failure are not dealt with swiftly, it could lead to repercussions far beyond the borders of Russia. This is not just a matter of technical failure or isolated loss. It is a strategic disaster that could fundamentally alter the course of Russia's military and international relationships. The failed test has revealed significant vulnerabilities in Russia's defense systems, and this has exposed them to the very adversaries they have sought to deter for years. For the first time, it appears that Russia's military may not be as formidable as it was once perceived. In recent years, Russia has invested heavily in cutting-edge technologies, including advanced stealth aircraft and precision munitions, hoping to project an image of military superiority. These tests were designed to showcase these capabilities on the global stage, but the disastrous results have instead done the opposite, exposing the flaws in Russia's military operation. A once proud squadron, seen as one of the most elite in the Russian Air Force, has been reduced to ashes, and Moscow is struggling to contain the fallout. The failed test wasn't just a tactical blunder. It was a public spectacle that has shaken Russia's confidence in its own military. It sends a chilling message to adversaries and allies alike that Russia's much-hyped military technology might not be as invincible as once believed. This could have devastating implications not only for Russia's defense strategy, but also for its political standing on the world stage. For nearly 3 years, Russia has been engaged in a series of military exercises and tests, incrementally demonstrating its technological prowess. These were always calculated moves, designed to send a signal to the West and its allies, indicating that Russia's strength was increasing. But tonight, as Russia grapples with the results of its failed test, we see the cracks in the armor. This is not a simple mistake. It is a disaster with far-reaching consequences. The strategy of incremental escalation, where Russia sought to build its military strength piece by piece, has now given way to a disaster of unprecedented scale. What was once seen as a progressive and calculated approach to military power has now become a complete disaster. Russia is now at a critical juncture, whether to admit the failures of its technology, which could bring its global military credibility into question, or to double down and risk even greater consequences. The stakes are higher than ever for Vladimir Putin as he faces a critical decision whether to acknowledge the blowback from this catastrophic failure and make the necessary concessions, or to persist with the same level of aggression that has already led to such significant loss. Throughout history, such moments have defined the fates of entire nations. Ultimatum diplomacy has often been the most dangerous form of international relations because it creates artificial deadlines and forces decisions under immense pressure. Similar ultimatums have ignited past conflicts, from the tensions leading to World War I to the more recent crises in the Middle East. Now, Russia finds itself on the receiving end of an ultimatum of its own, one that has been fueled not by external pressures, but by its own internal mistakes. The world is watching as Putin must choose whether to accept the massive costs of this failure or risk further disintegration of Russia's position in global politics. If Putin chooses to ignore the severity of this situation and refuses to make the necessary changes, he could find himself facing even greater isolation, both domestically and internationally. A failure to act decisively could mean the end of Russia's credibility as a military power. For Russia's leadership, this failure cannot be brushed aside. The world is watching, and any further mistakes will only reinforce the perception that Russia is on the decline. The question now is whether Putin will view this failure as a sign to recalibrate Russia's military strategy, or whether he will double down on his aggressive posture, believing that it will somehow secure his political survival. Throughout his time in power, Putin has often shown a willingness to accept significant costs rather than admit failure. Will this be another instance where Russia's leadership chooses the path of defiance and risk rather than seeking a diplomatic or pragmatic resolution. The pressures on Putin are immense. This military debacle has exposed the weaknesses in Russia's defense systems, and the entire world now knows that their much-feared military machine is not invincible. If Russia's military is incapable of delivering on its promises, what does that mean for the future of the country and its global standing? The questions surrounding Russia's leadership have never been more urgent, and the answers may determine the fate of Russia itself. This is a moment that will go down in history as one of the most consequential failures in modern Russian military history. The full impact of this failure is still unfolding, but one thing is clear: Russia's military is no longer the force it once was. Whether this marks the beginning of the end for Putin's aggressive ambitions or if it leads to an even more dangerous escalation remains to be seen. As we watch these events unfold, we are reminded of the dangers of overestimating military power and underestimating the potential for failure. The consequences of this military test gone wrong will reverberate for years to come, and only time will tell whether Russia can recover from this disastrous blowback. The next 48 hours will reveal Putin's true intentions. Will he make the hard decisions necessary to protect Russia's position, or will he persist down a path that could lead to even greater peril? Only time will tell. But for now, Russia finds itself on the brink of a strategic collapse that could alter the global balance of power. The aftermath of this military test catastrophe is unfolding quickly, and the ripple effects are felt not just in Moscow, but across the global stage. Russia, which has prided itself on its military prowess for decades, now finds itself in an uncharted territory. The repercussions for this failed test are multifaceted, touching not just on military strategies, but on Russia's broader geopolitical ambitions. Putin's decisions over the coming days will be crucial in determining whether this is a turning point for Russia or merely another obstacle on the road to even greater aggression. As European and NATO intelligence agencies continue to monitor the situation, there is a growing concern over the vulnerability of Russia's military asset. If this test was part of a larger effort to enhance Russia's defense capabilities, the failure of this operation raises serious questions about the future of Russia's military technology. If their most advanced fighter jets could be destroyed so easily, what does that say about the reliability of their other military innovations? The potential for further technological failures could now haunt Russian forces, making it even harder to maintain their posture of military superiority. This failure may also signal the beginning of a technological arms race, with countries like the United States, China, and NATO now more determined than ever to leap ahead of Russia in terms of cutting-edge military technology. The global perception of Russia as a technological powerhouse is now at risk of being shattered, leaving them at a disadvantage in future international negotiations or military standoffs. Nations that once hesitated to challenge Russia's military may now feel emboldened to take bolder stances, knowing that Russia's ability to project power has been compromised. For the United States and its NATO allies, the implications are clear. Russia's vulnerability could open up strategic opportunities, while there may be initial hesitation in public forums to express relief or hope behind closed doors. The intelligence community is no doubt preparing to capitalize on Russia's newfound weaknesses. If Russia's air superiority, one of its primary military advantages, is no longer as robust as previously thought, it could change the calculus of air and ground operations in future conflict. NATO may now feel more confident in bolstering its own defenses or even stepping up its support for Ukraine, knowing that Russia's strength has been dramatically weakened. However, the domestic consequences for Putin may be just as severe as the international ramifications. The Russian president is not known for admitting failure, especially in matters of military prowess, but this incident may force his hand. For the first time in years, Russia's elite circles, those who have long enjoyed the fruits of the Kremlin's power and influence, may begin questioning the viability of their leader's vision. Could this military failure be the straw that breaks the camel's back? Putin's domestic critics may see this as a significant weakness, and the resulting fallout could spark internal divisions that destabilize his regime. Meanwhile, the Russian military leadership will now have to contend with the fallout from this disastrous test. The loss of an entire squadron is not just a financial blow, but a psychological one as well. High-ranking officials, generals, and strategists will likely face intense scrutiny for overseeing an operation that led to such a catastrophic failure. There is no doubt that tensions within the Russian Ministry of Defense are rising as blame shifts from the lower ranks to those who crafted the ill-fated strategy. A sense of shame and guilt may spread among the ranks as Russia's military leadership faces a situation they cannot easily spin into a victory. The situation in Russia's military circles is further complicated by the fact that many of the hardliners within the government and military elite view Putin's strength as a reflection of his ability to project power. If this failure exposes vulnerabilities in Russia's military capabilities, the hardline factions may demand even more aggressive action, further escalation in Ukraine, or direct confrontation with NATO. These factions will push Putin into a corner where he could either acknowledge his mistakes or continue to escalate tensions, even at the risk of further catastrophe. One of the most pressing questions in the coming days will be whether Putin is willing to face the consequences of this failure head-on, or whether he will attempt to cover it up. If he chooses the latter, it could damage his credibility with both domestic and international audiences. The world is watching, and any attempt to ignore or hide the scale of this failure will only draw more attention to Russia's diminished power. The strategic fallout from this military disaster may also change the calculus for Russia's allies. Countries like China, India, and even Iran, who have long been wary of Western powers and aligned with Russia for their own geopolitical reasons, will now have to reconsider their support. If Russia's military power can no longer be relied upon, these countries may begin to hedge their bets, seeking to distance themselves from Russia's failing ambition. China, in particular, may see this as an opportunity to push forward its own technological advances, further distancing itself from Moscow and solidifying its position as the dominant power in Eurasia. Diplomatic repercussions will also be felt across the board. Countries that have long been at odds with Russia, including Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltic states, will seize upon this failure to rally support for stronger sanctions and diplomatic isolation. The failure of this test has provided a critical opportunity for Russia's adversaries to paint the Kremlin as incapable of projecting military strength, even in its own backyard. This could embolden countries like Ukraine, which have faced Russia's aggression for years, and give them new confidence that Russia's military is not as indomitable as once thought. For Russia's allies in Europe, the situation is delicate. While many European nations are wary of pushing Russia too far, seeing Russia as a necessary partner in energy and trade, the failure of this test may shift opinions within the EU. If Russia's military continues to falter, European leaders could feel less inclined to engage with the Kremlin and may even move toward further isolation, ensuring that Russia's relationship with the West continues to deteriorate. In the wake of this debacle, the next 48 hours will be critical. The timeline is ticking, and Putin will be forced to decide whether to act decisively to repair the damage or risk losing more ground. If he fails to respond quickly, the situation could spiral out of control, leading to greater internal instability and wider international isolation. The world is watching with bated breath as Russia faces one of its most significant challenges in modern history. This is a moment of reckoning for the Russian military, and it will define the future of Russia's standing on the global stage. Whether Putin can recover from this catastrophic failure or whether it marks the beginning of a steep decline for Russian power remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that the world has now seen that Russia's military, once considered a formidable force, is not as invulnerable as it was once believed. As the clock ticks down, the geopolitical consequences of Russia's failed military test continue to unfold at a rapid pace. The situation is evolving quickly, and with each passing hour, the pressure on Putin to act decisively grows exponentially. The fate of Russia's military strategy, the stability of the Russian government, and the balance of power in Europe and beyond are all hanging in the balance. Putin's response to this crisis will either solidify his grip on power or signal the beginning of the end of Russia's aggressive stance on the world stage. The military consequences of this failure are immense. For Russia's Air Force, the destruction of an entire squadron is not just a material loss, but a strategic blow to its operational capabilities. Losing this squadron, one of the most advanced in the Russian military, compromises Russia's air superiority, which is central to its military doctrine. The psychological impact on the Russian forces cannot be understated either. Pilots, commanders, and ground crews will be left questioning their own readiness and confidence in their equipment. The cascading effect of this loss will likely be felt throughout the ranks, undermining morale and possibly leading to hesitation or caution in future operations. On the global stage, Russia's military image has been severely damaged. For years, Russia has portrayed itself as a military superpower, capable of projecting strength far beyond its borders. This test failure has shattered that image, causing potential allies and adversaries alike to reassess their calculations. Countries that once feared or respected Russia's military might now have to question whether they can rely on it for their security needs. Military alliances and partnerships that were once built on the assumption of Russian strength may begin to fray as nations seek alternative paths to security. The economic impact of this disaster is equally profound. Russia has already suffered under the weight of international sanctions and isolation, but this failure could push it further into a corner. If Russia's military is no longer a credible threat, its ability to negotiate and project power on the global stage will be significantly diminished. Countries like China, India, and those in the Middle East, who have relied on Russia's military strength to counterbalance Western influence, may now reconsider their alliances. Russia's economy, already strained by the sanctions imposed in the wake of its aggression in Ukraine, may be further weakened by the fallout from this military failure. If Russian leaders are unable to turn this disaster into a victory, the economic collapse could deepen, leading to widespread instability. For the Russian political elite, the stakes are now much higher. Internal factions, which have long supported Putin's aggressive foreign policy, will now have to weigh their loyalty against the political and economic consequences of continuing to follow a leader who has allowed such a catastrophic failure to occur. There will likely be a rise in internal dissent, especially from the more hardline members of the Russian government and military, who may view this failure as evidence of Putin's weakness. For them, this test failure may represent the beginning of a loss of confidence in their leader. If Putin is unable to turn the situation around quickly, his political survival could be at risk, leading to greater instability in Russia's already fractured political landscape. The international community, meanwhile, will be closely watching how Russia reacts to this disaster. The US, NATO, and European powers are already reassessing their approach to Russia, and this failure could force them to act. If Russia continues to struggle to regain its military standing, the West may see this as an opportunity to further isolate Russia diplomatically and economically. The fear is that if Russia's military continues to unravel, the global security landscape could shift dramatically, with new power dynamics emerging in places like Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Middle East. The possibility of expanded NATO influence and a more assertive response from countries like Ukraine and Poland could change the strategic map of Europe, creating a new era of tension in international relations. However, the most important factor in the coming days will be Putin's personal response to this crisis. The next 48 hours will be crucial in determining whether he can recover from this debacle or whether it signals the unraveling of his presidency. If he chooses to acknowledge the failure and work toward de-escalation, he could potentially mitigate the damage to his international standing, but this would require significant concessions, something that Putin has historically been unwilling to do. On the other hand, if he chooses to double down on his aggressive policies, he risks further alienating the international community and deepening Russia's isolation. In either case, Putin's leadership will be tested like never before, and the consequences of his choices will resonate far beyond Russia's borders. This crisis underscores a fundamental truth about international relations. The balance of power is always in flux, and no nation's military strength is guaranteed. Even the most powerful nations can find themselves vulnerable to failures in their military strategy or technology. As the world watches Russia grapple with this unprecedented failure, it serves as a reminder of the fragility of military power and the delicate nature of geopolitical influence. For Russia, the next steps will determine whether this is a turning point, a moment when the country shifts away from its current trajectory of aggression, or whether it will be yet another chapter in the story of a nation that overestimated its strength and underestimated its enemies. The political fallout, the military ramifications, and the economic impact of this failure will be felt for years to come. Putin's decision-making in the coming hours will either cement his legacy as a leader who faced adversity head-on, or mark the beginning of a long and painful decline for Russia on the world stage. This incident also has broader implications for military strategy globally. It serves as a warning to all nations that reliance on military technology, while important, is not a guarantee of success. Russia's reliance on cutting-edge weapons and high-tech fighter jets has now proven to be a double-edged sword with the failure of this test, highlighting the risks associated with overconfidence in advanced military technologies. Countries around the world will undoubtedly reassess their own military strategies in the wake of this event, with many perhaps taking a more cautious approach to the development and deployment of new technologies. As for the future of global diplomacy, this crisis may be a harbinger of a new era, where military might is no longer the decisive factor in determining a nation's power. The international community may increasingly turn to diplomacy, cyber capabilities, and economic influence to shape global relations, recognizing that the traditional notion of military superiority is not as reliable as it once was. The dynamics of power are shifting, and countries that understand this shift may be better positioned to navigate the new world order. In conclusion, The ramifications of Russia's failed military test are still unfolding, and the coming days will be critical in determining how this disaster will reshape the future of Russia's military and geopolitical standing. With the clock ticking and Putin facing a moment of truth, the world watches as this unprecedented crisis threatens to unravel the very fabric of Russia's military might. This is not just a moment of reckoning for Russia. It is a defining moment for the future of international relations and military strategy in the 21st century.